Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Fairy Tale Wiki Twitter Talk. I hope you're all doing well and that you're excited for our next episode. With me today, I've got Jesslyn Sugawara. She is one of our Twitter followers, a Fairy Tale fan, and a regular TikTok user, and we're going to talk about that. So I'm very excited to have her on. Jess, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing fine too. Thank you for asking, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here. I really appreciate it.
No, of course. I'm really excited.
Glad to hear it. So let's just jump right into it. You're a fan of the Fairy Tale series, so how did you get started in it? How did you become a fan initially?
Basically, it was my freshman year of college, so back in 2018, I started watching it. Um, and I was just going through Netflix. I saw it and I was like, this one's been really popular. I've seen a lot about it, and I started watching it. And it took me a minute to get into it, but then like after episode 10, I was hooked and I watched all of what was out, which was like just before the final season in like a month, and I was like working through finals and everything. I was like, no, I need to watch this, and I put it before my school stuff, and it was really funny. But yeah, and I fell in love with it immediately. I loved the characters, and I think too the storyline really got to me at that point because of like I was kind of alone at school for a minute, and it really became like a comfort show for me, if that makes sense. I just loved the idea of it and like the way that all the characters were connected, and like I really needed that in that moment. So I think that's why like this is one of my favorite shows because of the meaning like how much it means to me for the time that like when I was watching it, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. It's something that I've heard from a lot of people who've done these interviews and people who might just know casually from other places that Fairy Tale, because of its internal sense of community and belonging, is something that really helped them when they were going through a difficult time because, maybe they didn't have friends, maybe they were like you, they were in college, they didn't really know anybody. But finding a show that was all about that stuff and was also really exciting and really engaging really gave them a nice sense of belonging.
Yeah, it was so easy to connect with too. Like I just the idea of it and just like everything about it. It was funny. It made me cry a lot, and I was like, I think helped me let out a lot of like pent up emotion that I was like, oh, like I needed to let that out, and it was just really, ugh, I love that show so much. It's so good.
Who's your favorite character in the show?
Oh my God. It's so hard because I love so many for different reasons. But the first one that comes to mind is Natsu Dragneel. Just because of who he is. At first I was like, this guy's kind of crazy. Like I wasn't at first like super connected with him, but I think in the end when you see that like he's really passionate about, what he's doing, who he cares about, like even if he's known someone for 5 minutes, he's already like I got to protect this person with my life. And I absolutely adore that about him. I think, I just love who he is. I've always been obsessed with like his magical power. I think that's so different. Like the dragon slayers themselves. And I love him, but at the same time I also love Lucy just because I can relate to her character a lot, her wanting to write like stories about like her own adventure and like turning that into like her own story. Like I just love that, her coming from a different lifestyle than everyone else and then her wanting to like join this like rowdy bunch of kids is like absolutely amazing to me. So like it's a tie, but I think Natsu takes the cake.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, Natsu is the main character. He's meant to be relatable in that regard, and one of the most noteworthy aspects of his character definitely is his passion. You can probably say that's kind of a joke because, like, power. His power is fire, and fire obviously symbolizes passion. So maybe there's a nice connection that Mishima got either intentionally or unintentionally. To me, that totally makes sense. I mean, he's definitely engaging in a lot of ways, and he's a character that's very easy to root for because he doesn't necessarily have anything that holds him back in that regard. Some people might say that makes him a generic shonen protagonist, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree. But there's advantages and disadvantages to that kind of character.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I like to point out about the fire thing. That makes a lot of sense. So maybe he did tie into that. But yeah, like he's a very like his character's kind of seen in throughout a lot of like shojin, but I think that just what makes him like I don't know. He has like different aspects that make him different because he's kind of like silly and stuff at the same time, it's like all of a sudden it's like this 180 switch of like full on seriousness, and then it like goes away, which is I love it.
Absolutely. And since you mentioned that Natsu is your favorite character, I am inclined to ask this question before some others. How do you feel about Natsu's shipping? Do you ship him with Lucy, Lisana, or some other character, or do you just not care about that aspect whatsoever?
Honestly, I love him and Lucy a lot together. And it's funny because there's like so many ships, and I think they're all valid in their own way, 100%. Because I can see why a lot of people ship him and Lizana, because when they were showing their childhood moments, I was like, you know what? That's so cute. But there's something about him and Lucy, like their dynamic, I think is hilarious. And it just makes, I don't know, it's just they have a lot of really sweet moments that I absolutely adore. And like he didn't hesitate to like let her in. And so like I think that's like really cool. Like he didn't see her for like this like wanna like her trying to like become one of them. Like he's just like, oh, you want to be a fairy tale? Like, all right, come on in. Like we don't care where you come from. Like it's like no judgment whatsoever. But honestly, him and Lucy are like one of my favorites. Like I was rooting for them day one. And I absolutely love the relationship because it's funny. They can be silly together at the same time. They're just like constantly hanging out, and it's just she's keeping him in check, which I find hilarious. But yeah, he's just like this great comfort, I think, for her too. So I love it a lot.
And I think a lot of fans who do ship them feel the same way, that they have a nice balancing act to one another, because one is obviously, as you said, the very passionate one. The other is much more level headed and straightforwardly thinking.
Yeah, 100%. I also feel like Natsu has been like kind of a source of hope for Lucy. Especially like towards like the finals, like the more larger battle points throughout like as the series goes on. Like there's moments where, I feel like Lucy wouldn't necessarily lose hope, but she gets worried, and then he just comes in and is like, it's gonna be okay. So that's like one other reason that I absolutely love them, because like he's given her a lot of sense of hope, and has really like helped her throughout a lot of things in like her life as well, and helping her grow. And he doesn't even realize it, but he's like, cool, like I that's another reason why I love them so much. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I know exactly the different points of. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. It definitely happens through a lot of different points in the series, so there are definitely examples you can pick from to exemplify that. And speaking of points in the series, I'm curious, what would you say is your favorite story arc in the series?
ugh, without a it's so hard because I love it. I love all of it because they all have like their own special things. But for me, the one that sticks out the most is the Grand Magic Games slash Eclipse arc. Like right when like that transition to like the new animation starts. Just because that arc alone, I love the opening for it. It's opening 15. I love the opening. I love it's that one made me cry the most, if that makes sense. Um, and the character development in that, and the way that we see like Lucy having to use a lot of her power out of nowhere, the kind of drastic change in how like I feel like the first half of like the fairy tale that we saw was kind of more silly. Like, yeah, it had its moments, it had its like sad moments, but like at this point with the Eclipse arc, I feel like it got really real and really deep. And we see a lot of like, I don't know, tragedy starting in this one, and then it kind of goes into like a like less tragic arc, more silly. But this one just really sticks out to me a lot because I love the way that the characters interact with each other after like literally having like kind of a good time at these games. At first it was like fun and games, and there was like some slight sabotage and everything, but it was still fun. And then all of a sudden it's like these dragons are coming in from the past to like destroy everyone. And then you have that part. Am I allowed to talk spoilers? Like, is that okay?
That's entirely okay.
Okay. So, and then you have past Lucy come in to try and save them. And like, you don't know anything of like, it's hinted that like, sure does not look great at all. She's not the same Lucy. Like, it's Lucy, but she has like no light in her eyes. Like, she looks so upset. And I feel like for this one, you really see like the relationship between all of the fairy tale members, because there is a point where like they all died at some point, and you're like, what just happened? This was not like this the day before. And like the drastic change in like everything, and like we actually like see like how important they are to one another. Um and like the moment that kills me the most is when future Lucy like finally like goes to like the golden field scene. Um and I can't even think about that scene without crying, because when she finally gets like her peace and she goes home, but it's like kind of like an idea of like heaven, and she sees them all there like a silhouette of like her guild and everything. To me that kills me, because they're in another world, they all like passed away. So yeah, and to me that hurts me the most, to know that like in another world that they don't exist, like they're gone, you know, like the fact that they died, and knowing that like my favorite characters, like that whole group, I love all of them, and to know that they are no longer existing, like they died, and you know it was a tragic death, that just kills me inside, because it's like I just can't think about them not being alive anymore, you know? And it's not like just one of them, it was the whole guild. Granted, it's a beautiful scene because like Lucy is reunited with them in such a beautiful place, but at the same time it's like, "Oh my god, like they died. Like they're dead in another timeline, like they're gone." And like that that kills me the most. Like that was the one thing that like I loved and hated, because I was crying so much. And that was like one of the scenes in Fairy Tale that like you put it on and like I cry instantly. Even just with the music for it, like I just cry instantly.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely one of the more emotional gut punching scenes in that arc, and that arc generally is full of them for a lot of people. Obviously, it starts off with the battles that everyone was enjoying, like when they were doing the original tournament. But then you have the content with Future Rogue and Future Lucy. Then there's Gray and Juvia, and then there's Yotir later on. So obviously, it's something where Mishima kind of just kept the punches rolling and never really stopped with it. And I would like to ask you a question regarding the final battle between Natsu and Future Rogue, and as well as the other Dragon Slayers. You mentioned earlier on that you like the aspect of Dragon Slayer magic, but how did it make you feel that Dragon Slayer magic had been introduced in the series right from episode one, and yet it actually took us a very long time to actually see a dragon be slain?
Honestly, like it's interesting because yeah, like you said, we're introduced to the magic, but I feel like throughout the series, as they added on like new dragon slayers, like you got to learn more about it. And what I liked about this one too, it was very prominent to the plot, if that makes sense. Like the way that they added on to it, it was like the whole point, like it's throughout the end, like how they got their magic and stuff. So it was interesting though, because you just see, oh, Dragon Slayer magic, it looks like kind of like everybody else's magic. But as the story went on, you find out that it's a lot stronger than what it is. And like, you know, as we see like Natsu finding out about like fire dragon force, and you know developing like small scales, but that's something that grows progressively like throughout the series as he fights like main bosses. um and then same with Wendy, you know, we see how she uses hers, and with Gajiel, you know, it's one that like you see it later, especially like develop towards the end and stuff. And to finally see it use like use like when a dragon was actually slain in the end, like I feel like it was a big buildup so that you can understand that this magic is like very powerful and also very beautiful, I think. But it's like nice to see that this was something that was like growing throughout the series. You didn't get a full like idea of it the same way that the characters didn't. They're like, oh, I can be stronger by using these elements, you know, to like around me. Like with Wendy, she figures out her dragon force, you know, as like taking in all of the air around her. Like she has that accessibility to access her dragon force a lot quicker. Um and just like kind of like using it. So I just think that's like you're constantly learning about this magic alongside the characters. And I think that's just is a big plot point. And to see it used at the end to finally slay a dragon. I think it was just kind of like that nice buildup to see like all of the dragon slayers. Like it's not just one, it's all of them, you know? So I love this magic because I think it's very different from like the other. I think they're all different types of magic. Um, but this one is like you're growing with it alongside the characters and understanding it as the series goes on.
And at the end, you're also not just slaying any dragon; it's the king of dragons.
Right. So it's like you needed all of them, and they're all different in their own way. Like you have, light, dark, or shadow, the air, metal, like all of them having to come together to slay this dragon. So it's not like it kind of shows you that like this one is like you could like individually you could possibly slay them, but I think for the king of dragons it's like you needed all of them to come together. And I think that's really cool because it wasn't just also like the first gens or like it was second generation and third generation dragon slayers as well. So like you needed all of them to come together to like defeat it, which I think is like really cool. um but again, you're also learning about this magic alongside the character because by the end of it you kind of have a full understanding of like dragon slayer magic, and like them using it so beautifully to defeat the king of dragons is like absolutely beautiful. And I just think that's like really good storytelling because you can kind of relate to the characters and learning alongside it, if that makes sense. I mean, that was for me at least. Like I would like that I was able to learn this magic like with the characters because they're like, oh, I didn't know I could do that, or like that's how I'll look when I have it. Like I think it's really cool.
I think there's a lot of people who would agree with you, especially because a lot of people, from my understanding, did actually enjoy that final battle and they liked seeing all seven dragon slayers together.
Yeah, I feel like too that like some of the like those characters just kind of stood out the most in like their own individual arcs when they had them, like the dragon slayers, and it was like really cool to know that like, oh my gosh, there's other ones. And at the same time they all had like the same backstory. And they were all like what happened like a couple years ago, except for like the second generations. But like everyone else was like what happened like this day we all lost like our dragons and stuff. And I think that was just a really cool build up at the end to where like they actually come together to defeat this dragon. And I think that's just really cool because it's just like they got to defeat the thing that like basically kind of like that destroyed them in the end, like or took away like something precious to them. And like you got to grow alongside them, and just having them come together at the end is like, huh, there was a reason why they all individually stood out in their own arcs when they had them. And this was why. So I just think that's really cool.
Definitely. Now, speaking of arcs, I do have to flip it around a bit. What would you say was your least favorite arc in Fairy Tale?
Oh Lord. Oh my gosh, that's a hard one because they're all great in their own way. I think maybe the first arc, just because granted it is the introduction, but I think because like at first it's like it's not as good as the second one. Like they each get better in their own way, if that makes sense. So probably the first one, but again, it's the introduction to all the characters, so I don't like dislike it. It's just out of all of them, it's my least favorite because not that much happens in it. Again, it's the introduction arc. I totally understand that. But there's a build up as each one goes on. So like that one is like nah to me. All the rest of them are like really good, if that makes any sense.
I think it makes sense. I mean, obviously, the earlier arcs are just establishing the characters and the setting, whereas the later arcs, once you've already made that progress, can really have a lot more fun with them. And that's what people like about later arcs like Tenro Island or the Grand Magic Games or Tartarus.
No, yeah. So like it's just hard because like those are the ones that like stick out the most. And while I pretty much have the first season memorized from how much I've watched like the first season itself, um it's just like this one's nothing compared to like the ones you're about to see. So, it's my least favorite. I don't hate it. It's just
Yeah, that's totally fair. So let's turn around a bit and talk about something that you love doing. Now, we mentioned it in the intro. You do fairy tale content on TikTok, so why don't you tell us about what you do and what made you want to do it?
honestly, I was, it was quarantine and I was like, I don't like I'm bored. Like I want to do something. So I had posted a TikTok about like clips from like funny moments that I saw in anime that like people wouldn't notice. And I was like, oh my gosh, like people thought it was funny. Then one day I was inspired by this one audio that I heard. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's funny. Like they want to walk down the aisle to like an Avengers theme. And I was like, oh, if it were up to me, like in my head, I was like, I would walk down to the fairy tale theme. And I was like, wait, that's good content, right? So I took their version of the audio, the first half. So credit to the first half to that person. And then I edited in the like the opening the fairy tale theme like that I don't know what instrument it's called, like the bagpipes, I think that like that very iconic theme when the characters come in. And I clipped it in and I posted it on TikTok. And I was like, no one's gonna get this. No one's gonna get it. And within like an hour, I had 100,000 views on it. And I was shocked because I was like, oh my gosh, there's actually other people who appreciate fairy tale on this app. Because I had seen no content about it. So I was like, let me check this out. So I posted it and people related to it. They loved it. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna do this, or I did do this at my wedding. And from then on, I was like, oh, I like this. I like doing this because I like talking to people about anime with talking to yeah about anime. So I did other stuff. So as time went on, I watched more anime, obviously during quarantine. But a lot of the things that I do when it comes to fairy tale content is I'll take popular audios that you hear on TikTok, whether they're funny or something, and I'll add like I'll do skits with them. And so like I'll say like this is this character talking and just kind of make it relatable. Like, oh my gosh, that's something that the characters would do. Or like, oh my gosh, like yes, Natsu would say that to Lucy, or how the characters would act with each other. And like, or I'll take other TikTok videos and I'll duet them. So they're both playing at the same time, like my face reaction to it, and then like whatever TikTok it is. And if I feel like if it's funny, I will add like the names of the characters above saying like this is Natsu and like this is Gray or something. And if the way that they're arguing or something, I'll match it to like what character I think it fits best and say like this would be them in the guild hall. And people will be like, they would do something like that. They would react like that to that thing. Like I like doing that because I feel like, I don't know, it kind of connects me with the characters more and it allows people to be like, yep, that's something they would do, kind of giving them more content besides like what we've seen in the anime. So like that's just kind of the stuff that I do alongside with other anime. Um, I'll talk about like the way that I think characters would react in a certain situation. One of the ones that I did for Fairy Tale was how I think that they would act during quarantine. Like, what are the things that they would do? And it was like Natsu would stay quarantined with Lucy because he just would break into her apartment and then he'd be stuck there. Like that's something he would do, and she'd be like, why are you doing this? And she would be trying to write this entire time and he wouldn't let her. So like those kind of conversations with them. I'll share my story about why I loved fairy tale so much on there, and just anything that comes up I will just be like, this is fairy tale content. So that's just kind of, if that makes sense, that's kind of what I do, and it's so much fun. Oh my gosh, maybe like I had like maybe what 1,000 followers by the time like I posted that one video of fairy tale. And by the next morning, I had about like almost 20,000 followers already. And I'm still getting, and I posted that video back in like March. Content and like likes and or anything, like I like that I can be one of the many voices for fairy tale. So if that makes sense, like I think, yeah, I've had like a lot of fun with it, and those are the videos that kind of stick out the most when it comes to like people wanting to like them.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, that's very similar to what I try to do on the Fairy Tale Wiki Twitter account. When I see somebody talking about Fairy Tale, saying that they're going to watch it or they just watched the first episode and they liked it, then I'll always try to do like a retweet or a like, get them a little bit of exposure. Hopefully, some of our other followers will, like their tweets, talk to them, encourage them to watch more, and hopefully they become part of the community as a result of that. So I see that as kind of similar to what you're doing on TikTok, and I think that's a really good thing to do.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and same for you. I think it's just this is one anime that I feel like needs to get out more. Like I know a lot of people seen it. It has a huge fan base. I feel like now that it's like kind of like ended, and I noticed that like I know there was like a 3 year wait for like the final season to come out, that it like kind of it kind of faded away a little bit. And I'm like, no, 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 come back. Like it's still a good show. Like this is one that I think like will always be in like my top three. And like I feel like a lot of people would enjoy this one. Um and it's just there's a lot to it that like you need to unwrap. And I think it's a great thing to unwrap. It's just kind of like, oh my gosh, like the more you go into it, the more like you get attached to these characters.
I definitely see where you're coming from. As somebody who's been in the fandom for over 10 years by this point, I've really
Wow.
seen it grow myself. Yeah, I know. I'm kind of dating myself in that regard, but I will, obviously not tell anyone how old I am, though, if you know me from other places, you are already aware. But what I will say is, I would like to just point out one small example. On fanfiction.net, where people write fanfiction about a variety of anime and manga, about 10 years ago, Fairy Tail had only about 3,000 ish fanfics. And right now, it's, I think, roughly the fifth or sixth most popular. By far, the number one is Naruto, and I'm not entirely surprised by that. And I believe number two might be Inuyasha. But Fairy Tail is quite heavily above even other popular anime like Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Yu-Gi-Oh, and a variety of others. So I think that the fandom definitely has grown in that regard. And I think content like yours and mine is actually very important for that kind of growth.
No, I 100% agree. That's really cool that it's like above, on fanfiction.net. That's really cool. And especially like, yeah. And I think too, like, it's nice to like know that there are people who like dedicate themselves to like, get other people to like, hey, watch this show, or like, here's information about it, or like, this is like an idea of like what you're going to get into once you like start it. And it's like, it's a kind of like that nice, like, comfort. You're like, oh, maybe like I will like this, and it also it's like it's just really cool to see, to like continue to see that growth. And like that people who have watched it and have enjoyed it have said that this is like one of their top animes that they've seen, and that it's gotten through them a lot. So I just think that's really cool for this show, that it's like it's still going, it's still popular, and it's special in a lot of people's hearts.
And it's something that I personally like to hear as somebody who has dedicated so much time to it, as somebody who helped build the wiki, who has run the Twitter account for years and has tried to reach out to people in the community. Hearing that kind of response from people who are either new to the show or have been a fan of the show for a long time is just something that I really take to heart. So I have just one final question for you. What are some of your favorite anime aside from Fairy Tail?
So I recently just caught up on Attack on Titan, and I have never had a show jump up so quickly to my top three so fast the way that it did. Just from episode one, I was hooked. And I put this one off for a while, and I'm kind of glad that I did, because then that means I didn't I mean I didn't know, but like I realized that I didn't have to wait that long for the final season to come out. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. I love the storytelling in this one, because if you watch, there's a lot of symbolism in here, and there's a lot of deeper meaning toward, like, there's a bigger picture here than like what we're seeing on screen. And I just think that's like beautifully done. And like these characters are so like well rounded. There's a lot of like growth and just plot twist on plot twist, and the cliffhangers. And like this is one that you're hooked every single episode. And as much as I love, filler episodes, um, this is one that like there's really no filler episodes. So you're just rolling with the punches. Like, and I love that. Um, I adore My Hero Academia. That is also in one of my top threes. It's one that's like very different from like what we've seen. I don't know, we've seen before. I feel like a lot of the times, it's very similar to like a lot of like shonen, but at the same time, it's very different. And I feel like there's a lot of character development here. This is one story that I'm like on top of the manga with. So, just kind of seeing how where the characters are now to how they were in the beginning is just like drastically different. And I just think that's like I cannot wait to see that animated. And I feel like the creator Horikoshi has a really great story here that's like very different. from what we've seen, but also a lot of stuff that's like very real in there, which I think is really cool. Um, I also love, and I feel like this one's also underrated. I really love Sword Art Online. I recently just finished that one up to like the season 4. And I think that's just one anime that's like really stuck with me too. It's one of the first ones that I kind of watched. And then that was one that like really stuck with me, and it's absolutely one of my favorites. I know that like a lot of people like don't necessarily like it, and I can see where they lost interest. I could totally see that at the parts, but like this is one that like I loved every minute of it, and especially after like that the second movie that came out before the third season, that's what like drew a lot of people back in. I was loving every single moment of it. And season 3 and season 4 that just came out are such a dramatic difference from the first two that you watched. And the character growth in these newest seasons are amazing. I love how they did it. I love this new animation that they have with it. It's so fun, and it's a different way that we've seen them, the characters, especially Kirito and Asuna. You see them how they are now than how they were like in the show, which I think is amazing. um yeah, and I've just been watching a lot of new ones that have come out. So like there, yeah, I'm on this like weekly anime watching time now, and it's hard because I'm like I don't like waiting every week for a new episode, but that's just how it's become, because like I've caught up on so many that I'm like I want to keep watching them, or like the new seasons out. And one that I've been like really obsessed with too is the spin-off series slash continuation of the Inuyasha series, which has been really fun to watch. It's called Yashahime, the Half Demon Princess, which I think is like really cool because it follows the story of like a continuation of like Sesshomaru and Inuyasha, but like spoilers, like, you know, of their kids, which I think is really cool, but it's a lot darker than what you kind of expect. Follows, but I love it too because if you watch it, it has the same type of editing and the music of the original series, Inuyasha and Inuyasha Final Act. Like they kind of kept that style going, which I absolutely love. I'm glad that they did that. And it's been one that like I really enjoyed watching. Yeah, I watch a lot of too like romance ones, like Fruits Baskets is one of my favorites. And Darling in the Franxx as well. And yeah, there's just so many that have come out that I'm like I can't stop. Oh, and then the other one that I'm obsessed with. I'm sorry. I'm just I love talking about anime. So the other one that I'm obsessed with,
I can tell, but that's entirely okay.
the other one that I'm recently obsessed with that I just caught up with is The Promised Neverland, which is very different from what I expected. I heard about it. I knew that it wasn't as light, if that makes sense, as it comes out to be, and that it's very twisted, but it's like really well done, and it's it's a beautiful story. So those are the current ones that I'm like on top of right now, and that took way longer than it needed to. But if I can recommend more anime to people, I gladly will do so.
That's a totally legitimate thing to spend a lot of time talking about anime you're passionate about. I respect that. I've seen quite a lot of the shows that you've mentioned. I'm currently watching the Inuyasha sequel, and I do think it's pretty good. If you're interested in a new show, I don't know if you've already seen it, but Dr. Stone is a really good one. So I always recommend that to people. If you're interested in a show that's not new, but still very funny, similar to early Fairy Tale, but actually better than that, in my opinion, Konosuba is something I always jump to recommend to people because I just love them. Like I love the characters, I love the world. It's just hilarious. Like it's one of the few anime that literally gives me a stomach ache because I laugh so hard.
Amazing. I feel like I've heard of that one, and I think that one's on my list. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, that one's on my list. I have,
Bump it up.
yeah, no, I definitely have to because there's so many that I'm like, I want to watch this, but then there's this, and then there's that, and I'm like, I can't decide. So I'll bump it up. I'll bump it up.
Sounds good. And as far as bumping up, like, thank you for putting this in your schedule. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here. I love talking to Fairy Tale fans. I love talking to our followers on Twitter. It's just a really engaging time. I love knowing more about you guys and what your passions are. And so thank you for sharing that with me and all of the rest of our listeners.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I don't get to talk about fairy tale to a lot of people. Um, or at least those who would understand it at the level that like I do of like appreciation. So I was glad to be here. So thank you so much.
You're certainly welcome. Please stick around and we'll have a lot more content in the future.
Of course, for sure.
And listeners, thank you for your time. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to this. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. We will be back next time with the next episode of Fairy Tale Wiki Twitter Tech. But until then, I hope you all have a great day.